First of all, thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout. Still a little bigger room than we probably needed, but this is the best turnout we've had for one of these forums. So thank you for taking time to be here. My name is Steve Barth. I'm the Danvers Town Manager. I'm a member of the School Building Committee. Hopefully you had a chance when you got here to speak to one or more of the people in the room with the little stickers that says Project Team Member. This was kind of a new concept tonight, to just have an opportunity before the meeting started for really informal conversation before we sort of show you all what the School Building Committee and the design team have been working so hard on for a couple years now. So the purpose tonight is to sort of provide, for those of you who are here for the first time, a little bit of a background in terms of the process to date, how we got from where we started to where we are, to walk through some of the project-specific aspects, elements, physical space, site space, some of the improvements that have been built into the design in terms of parking and traffic, and sort of optimizing the use of the site. And then we'll have time for question and answer when the presentation is over. So on the screen you'll see sort of a general outline of what we're going to cover tonight. And we'll finish up with some next steps in terms of upcoming meetings that are on the calendar, and we'll go from there. So before I relinquish the microphone to Dr. Dana or the design team, this was actually a suggestion made at our last forum. Someone said, this is a great presentation you guys did, but you launched right into it, and some of us are just getting up to speed now on this, and so it would have been helpful to have a little bit of context for what we're talking about. So there's some information up on the screen that I'll go through fairly quickly. The building we're talking about was built in 1973. Believe it or not, it won a national award for design. But Pabst Blue Ribbon also won an award at the 1893 Chicago World Fair, and I'm not sure either has aged all that well. But it was a state-of-the-art building when it was built. As early, 2011 is when Public Works really started to bump up against some end-of-life issues in the building that weren't cost-effective anymore. The metal curtain walls had been rusted through, and they had to patch those. The roof was at the end of its use. The second roof had reached the end of its useful life. A lot of the building systems were getting old. So in 2013, the town submitted its first statement of interest to the Mass School Building Authority, which is a quasi-governmental entity that partners with schools on building projects. Their funding comes from a portion of the sales tax, and each year they choose a handful of projects to move forward with through the construction process. So we've partnered with the MSBA many times. We partnered with them on the high school, on the middle school, the Riverside School, going way back. And so on our fourth application, the MSBA accepted the Smith School. We had a town meeting in 2016, and the town meeting appropriated $1.8 million to allow for the feasibility and design process to get underway. The School Building Committee was formed shortly thereafter. Many other members of the School Building Committee are here tonight. We had a representative from the Selectmen, Finance Committee, the School Committee, staff, neighbors, town meeting members. So it's by design intended to be a diverse group representing kind of the major interests that we're focused on school projects. Just a quick note, because this is a question we get a lot. So we've gone to the MSBA and said we have a very stable student population here in Danvers. We would like to replace the school with one the exact same size. And the statistician at MSBA took off his glasses and said, this is an awkward conversation for me, because usually I'm telling school districts that they are grossly overestimating what they need. And in your case, we think you guys are grossly underestimating what's happening with your student population. We were quite skeptical. We said that's not true. We've been very stable. They pointed us to the study they did in 2005, which indicated what they thought the student population was going to look like in 2015, and they were off by one kindergartner in the 10 years. And so they say by 2025, you guys are looking at probably a 16-17% increase in your student population. Dr. Dana has indicated that we're seeing that in this kindergarten class is, I think, the largest we've ever had. And a lot of folks in the room, just in talking in the last 10 minutes, are talking about their 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds who are gearing up to go to this school. So and we're seeing it in this, anecdotally, that's what's happening in town. We're seeing a lot of turnover in the housing stock. And so it's a community that's getting a little younger. And so they said you really should be thinking about what kind of capacity you're going to need in 10 years as you design the school. So ultimately, what was accepted by the MSBA was a larger school than what we had initially thought we wanted to build. So the school building committee met. We brought on PMA Inc. They're the owner's project manager that represents the town's interests on this project. We hired TAP Architects to design the building, and just recently we went through a process to choose a construction manager who's now reviewing the schematic design and the project estimates to give us a sense of, so they can weigh in and make sure that they agree with what we're saying is what we are going to try to do. So as I said, this is the third forum that we've held. This is by far the best attended. So again, thank you for being here. We've had a number of presentations made before the selectmen and other public meetings. A couple of points here. Some of the slides and posters tonight are new, and those are in response to some of the recurring questions that have come up at the forums. The school building committee and staff and the neighbors all kind of agree. We needed to improve the traffic flow at this site. We needed more on-site parking. And again, this is a site it's surrounded by wetlands on 3 sides, and we needed to figure out a way to maximize the space. So I think you'll find that there are some great improvements that have been made in the design process on this front, and Joe and Charlie will talk about some of that during their time up here. And then, in terms of outreach review, one of the next things, we'll have a couple of meetings after the holidays. We'll get into that at the end, but we're going to do a half-day workshop for town meeting, which is something we did last year for some zoning updates that we did, and that was quite an effective way to have kind of informal conversations before town meeting, which can be it's a pretty formal venue, so it's nice to be able to kind of get into the weeds on a Saturday morning with coffee and pastry, so we'll do that again. I'm almost done, I promise. I think I have 2 more slides, but one of the questions is, why not just reuse the existing building? And when you do an MSBA project, they require you to look at 3 different options. They want you to look at a straight renovation option. Can you just renovate the building you have? They want to know if you need more space like we do, can you just put an addition on the building you have? Or are you proposing to build a new project? So the least expensive option would have been to just renovate the existing building. That would not have addressed the space needs that we're facing, and we would have been looking at doing an addition on a different school potentially down the road. And it certainly wouldn't have improved some of the education constraints, which Dr. Daniel will speak to in a few minutes, in terms of the way that open classroom, open concept building is laid out. It's also very disruptive to the students because you have to relocate them for 2 years, and we don't have other space. We would have to go find space to lease to do that, which has a pretty significant cost as well. The addition renovation turns out to be the most expensive option, and you see that a lot when you have an old building and you're trying to update that building and integrate it into a new addition. You spend more making the marriage work than if you just build new. So in this case, the school building committee, with input from the design team and staff and the MSBA, everybody should coalesce around the concept that we're talking about tonight, which is a new building right next to the old building, with the old building coming down at the end of the project. I think this looks like a regiment of British soldiers or something, but it's looks like an army of kids here. But this slide kind of talks about what I already touched on, which is the growth that we're seeing. And you can see the way that the MSBA projects out your K-5 population, and they want to see the capacity in all of the schools that you have, and that's how they backed into the number that they proposed that we go with, which is the 465 student building that we'll talk about tonight. I'm done for a little while, and I will come back at the end of the presentation. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Danvers to talk about some of the education aspects.
Thank you, Steve. This plan coincided perfectly with our strategic planning process for the district, so for our 7 schools. And last year's part of the process was the time to look at the educational programming. So we speak a lot about the building, the structure, all the pieces inside of it, but it really began with looking at what do we want for our children in Danvers for the Smith Elementary School. And the way that we do that in Danvers is to look at all of our schools. So we did that last year with a strategic planning process, educational visioning, and had over 50 community members come together different times during the spring last year to develop our strategic plan for the next 5 years. I'd like to share with you a couple of the key words, phrases from our vision, and then as you see the presentation unfold this evening, you'll see those connections in the design of our new school for Smith Elementary. In 2023, the Danvers Public Schools is an inclusive community of learners. You'll see that in the design. We want all of our students to be fully engaged and invested in their learning. And this space will help to enhance that learning for our students. And then some of the skills. We want our students to be skilled communicators, to be problem solvers, who are engaged in collaborative inquiry and make effective use of the technology and apply their learning in authentic real life situations. So with this new school, the construction, the building will enhance that, put in all 5 of our elementary schools, and then we're also seeing that in our middle school and our high school, the concepts of what we want in our vision, we will see that in all of our schools. And so with that, what happened through the educational process, the envisioning, we came up with really 2 main pieces. One, that collaboration was really the most important piece. So you will see that in the design, that there are collaborative spaces, the types of furniture we'll be looking at, how our classrooms come together, where they're located. And then the flexible use of space. So you'll see classrooms that are spreading out into the hallways, that we are able to have flexible uses of space. We think about in education, 100 years ago, that we had classrooms that had rows of desks and chairs. And in the 21st century, that really needs to change, but it has taken a number of years for that to change, and this will be a springboard for us in all of our schools to see that happen. And then from our educational vision, some of the other pieces that highlight for the entire district, we'll have equitable spaces for all of our elementary schools. Because this will be a larger school, we are able to move some programs into the Smith Elementary School, and that will help to make sure all of our schools have STEM. You'll see that highlighted with our architect this evening, what that will look like at the Smith Elementary School. For our arts, that there are dedicated spaces for our arts, stages. Smith School hasn't had a stage like our other elementary schools for the time that it's been open. And then the types of technology, and then the types of furniture. So looking at different furniture in all of our elementary schools, moving over time, it won't all happen at the same time, but over time through our budgets, looking at the types of flexibility, and this has really given us the opportunity through the Smith project to look at what we would want to see in all of our schools as we continue to move forward. And then the attendance areas. As Mr. Bother shared, that the attendance, the enrollment will be increasing for the town of Danvers. We've been able to work with our architect with the GIS program to really look at blocks of the town as to where our new kindergarten students will be coming from different parts of town. And instead of a redistricting, we'll be working with our school committee over the winter time and ready for our next kindergarten orientation in April to have flex zones, and really looking at our major roadways in Danvers, Route 62, Route 35, Elliott Street going into Beverly, those areas where we have transportation and could have flexibility between 2 different elementary schools for students to attend in different neighborhoods. So that will really help us to balance out class sizes throughout our 5 elementary schools. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to our architect, Charlie Hay.
I can't get too far away. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak this evening, and I'm going to walk you relatively quickly through the proposed design of the project, starting with talking a little bit in advance about process and timeline. The Massachusetts School Building Authority, as it's been referenced this evening, is the funding agency at the state level that participates in funding of Massachusetts public schools. If you are accepted into their grant program, you follow quite a prescribed process that has a series of milestone submissions. It's very thorough, very, very carefully vetted. We have already completed a number of the submissions in the timeline. The preliminary design program, which was really a fact-finding due diligence phase, a preferred schematic report, which is at when we selected the option to, as Mr. Bartha mentioned, the decision to go with a replacement school. The schematic design submission, which has just been completed and established the overall budget that the MSBA has now agreed to with the town, which is called a project funding agreement. And they had a board vote yesterday for the project, so that's a really important and exciting milestone. So the process has gone very well with the MSBA as a partner to the town. The thought is, if the town elects to proceed with the project, the contract documents for the project would be completed over the course of the winter and the spring and into the summer. Bidding would occur for the project next fall. There would probably be early site packages that were begun on site next summer or next fall. The majority of the project construction would happen over the course of the next 18 months, so the building would be done in the spring or summer of 2021. And once the new building is done, the old building gets torn down and the site work is completed. But it would be theoretically available for students either in the spring of 21 or the fall of 21. This is just a graphic version of that timeline. It shows you where we are today and where we are today and where we would be going. But I think I've described it in adequate detail. Here is a proposed site plan, and as Steve mentioned, we are bound by wetlands on the north, the south, the west, actually, and very considerably right here, as any of you who know the site know, it's standing water there. So trying to fit the building in with the existing soccer field, which we are going to keep, and an existing building in place during construction. There's really only one location on site that this building can go. So the building is proposed to go to the west of where the existing building is now, which is now woods. So the whole area that is currently wooded is where the new building would go. During construction, and somebody was asking, and forgive us if some of these questions have already been answered, and you're hearing this again, but there were questions during the initial part of the evening, excuse me, about what will be available to the students during the construction phase. And the existing hardscape play area, this also acts as a pickup zone in the afternoon, will remain during construction. That's not going anywhere. However, the students will not have access to the soccer field during construction. The soccer field is going to be closed during the course of construction just for safety reasons. Obviously, we don't want anybody having to go back there when the site's under construction. So there will be a little bit less green space because the side field in the back will not be available. That'll be part of the construction zone. However, there will still be outdoor play area for the students. Pick up and drop off and parking do not change during construction. They're going to be just like they are today. This is a slightly larger version of that same site plan, and it shows you just a little more detail where the new play areas will be. There will be a new green space in front of the building, and the soccer field will still be over on the other side of the building. There's access all the way around the building. As Steve mentioned, there's sort of frequently asked questions that we're trying to address a little bit this evening. One of them is relative to the issue of how pickup and drop-off will work for students. So it's a reasonable question to say, well, you're increasing the student population, which means you're increasing the amount of cars. How does that get handled? In the existing condition we have now, because the building is sort of right at the beginning of the access drive onto the site, and because the buses line up right in front of the building, you inevitably have a situation where if you tried to queue cars, they would be sitting behind buses with their flashers on. Or, even if there were no buses there, they would obviously stop there to pick up and drop off the children. So if you look at this, you realize there's very little site to queue cars. And we're sort of figuring there's about, maybe you could get 14 cars on site, but it's not a live queue because of this issue of the buses. In the proposed condition over here, we've moved a building considerably, if the existing building's here, we've moved it way over to the west. And what it allows us to do is stack a lot more cars on site. So we're predicting we could get almost 30 cars in a queue. But what's even more important is that the cars do not sit behind the buses. So when there's buses with their flashers on, the cars can bypass the buses. They have their own, their completely own vehicular access, which means that's truly a live queue. Those cars are keep moving. You know, they drop their pick child up and they pick their child up, and they move on. They're not stuck behind buses. The buses obviously get the queue right in front of the building, but the front door is here. So we think this is a significant improvement over the condition we have now. It will accommodate, not only accommodate a lot more cars on site, but those cars will be able to keep moving, which should get cars off of neighboring streets. Another frequently asked question has been about parking, and again, a reasonable question. If you're doubling the student population, what are you doing about parking? We are increasing parking by 78 spaces on site, and effectively we are tripling the number of spaces that are at the school. We're less than doubling the student population, so we obviously have a significant increase over the condition today. There will be a dedicated teacher lot. We expect something in the range of 70 plus staff at the school, so they will have their own dedicated lot, which allows us to have an additional almost 50 spaces that are essentially available for visitors, and they're also available obviously for pickup and drop-off. So in other words, if I want to drive in, I don't want to sit in the car queue, I want to actually go in and get my child or walk my child in, I can park along here and go into the building and leave the car in a parking space. So the intent here is to get all the staff in one lot and then have 50 additional spaces available, which again should be a significant improvement in the condition that we have today. A third frequently asked question has been about service and the location of the service for the new building versus the old building. The existing building, is right here. As most of you know, the dumpster area is right in clear view, right to the edge of the building, as is service in terms of deliveries to the kitchen. It's down the side road. Any service vehicle comes in and actually goes into the play area. So we instantly have a conflict between potential of students being outdoors and the service vehicle showing up. So that's effectively not a good planning, and not the kind of planning you want with a public school. The proposed condition puts the service area on the west side of the building with its own access drive that's entirely separate from the play area. So all the students who are, if they're outdoors, they're going to be playing over here on the east side of the building. Service is on the west side of the building. A service vehicle can come in, enter, and then leave again without any kind of impact on the life of the school. So again, we view that from a planning point of view as an improved condition. A quick run through of the building design. This is the proposed first floor. You enter here, you are next to administration. That's a controlled entrance. It's a secure vestibule that you have to be buzzed in if you're a visitor. This whole front of the building acts as a public building, essentially, a community building. It has a cafeteria that has a platform. It has a gym that shares that same platform. It has art and music. And the intent here is that this part of the building you could zone off the classroom wing and use this part of the building on an evening and at a weekend, and it really acts as a community building. It also allows art and music to use the lobby for performance space, for movement. If parents are coming to see an event, you don't see parents getting as deep into schools, deep in terms of with their physical passage, as they used to for security concerns. And this allows us to have parents come see an event associated with an art show, a dance recital, whatever, that's really part of the public part of the school. The rear of the building is the classroom wing, and most of you probably familiarized yourself. Well, you didn't. You can see the plan, so you don't know this. It's a split level plan. The lower floor will have K and 1 and 2. The upper floor will have 3 and 4 and 5. And some of the interesting aspects of this plan is that we have a wing here that on the lower floor is kindergarten, and on the upper floor is 5th grade. And that's kind of a nifty outcome because kindergarten has its own unique educational sort of agenda and different sized classrooms, and it's students coming for the first time to this school, and they get their own sort of kindergarten wing. 1 and 2 then can be teamed together, or you could actually have it all mixed up as 1 and 2 if you wanted to. But these classrooms can be paired for team teaching. So 1 and 2 are strung around here. In the center, much like there is today, the Smith is a media center, library media center, learning common. That will serve the entire school with a nice sort of learning stair here that kids can perch on. And as Dr. Dana mentioned, and I'll talk about again in a minute, these are wide corridors so that there are sort of extended learning zones for kids to go out into those spaces for small group work, individual instruction, and it allows kids to move and to have different places to learn. Here on the second floor is that 5th grade academy. The 5th grade, like the kindergarten, these are bookend grades. That 5th grade is kind of unique too. It's the transition year into middle school. It's taught differently. It's closer to a team teaching model than it is to a traditional elementary school model. It will have classrooms that are a little bit more geared for science. And it will allow kids to circulate through these classrooms over the course of the day. And then 3 and 4 again are arrayed around here. And up here is a STEM lab. So that's kind of a project space for students to use, presumably more the upper grades, but I think the entire school will be able to take advantage of it. But the hope is that we'll receive programming around sort of STEM curriculum during the course of the day, and will be used by all the students. Here are some conceptual views that with the conceptual with a capital C. These are early days, but this shows you a lobby picture. This is looking as you come into the building, looking down that lobby towards the classroom wing. This is where the gym is. Art and music is around the corner here. You see that in this slide. You've essentially now walked towards the classroom wing and turned around back to where you came from, and you see music here. This is a big old glass accordion door that can open, and again, that allows students to move out into the corridor. It allows us to have programs out there, and it allows for flexibility in using the spaces in a different way. This is turning back towards the classroom wing. You see that STEM lab, sort of makerspace room upstairs, and the media center downstairs. Students go up half a flight of stairs to go to the classrooms upstairs. They go down half a flight of stairs to go to the downstairs. And here, turning back, we see students sort of hanging out on a learning stair, and we've talked about the opportunities there to use that for small lectures, for a place for kids to read during library hour. I think it could be a really cool space for these kids. So it's a pretty neat design. This shows these extended learning spaces out in the corridor so that a student can come out of their classroom and take advantage of a different kind of place to work and a different environment to work, something a little more informal than they get in their classroom. And then again, another space at the end of the corridor that's a little bit larger with windows out towards the play area. They could have small presentations. You could take a classroom out there if you had a guest speaker or you wanted to do some kind of work like that. That's an aerial view of the same spot. This is a typical classroom. And these classrooms will have flexible furnishing. They'll obviously have, as you do now at the school, we'll have a series of stations. They'll have the same kind of thing you have now, but I think full of light and with really nice furniture. Conceptual views of the outside. This is kind of the entrance view as you drive up, and there's cars queued up, as I spoke about. And you sort of see the front of the school in front of you, and then the classroom wing going down the hill to the right. Here's another picture of the main entrance from where you would drop a student off. There's a porch there to kind of protect kids if they're waiting in the rain. This is a view from the soccer field, looking back at the back of the building, or the west side of the building. And there's an aerial view, and that shows you the context of, this is where the existing school is now. So that becomes the 70 space parking lot. This is where the woods are now, as you know, because there's a soccer field beyond it. So all those woods, unfortunately for the woods, are going to be moved in order to allow for this building to get built. Where the existing play area isn't too far away from where the new play area will be. It's just we flip-flopped where the building is. This will all be fully accessible. And again, you can see this long area for car queue, and you can see that there's area for cars to park, and you can see the soccer field in the far distance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe DeSantis from PMA, and I'm going to try not to unplug myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Hi, everyone. Joe DeSantis with PMA Consultants, Owner's Project Manager for the Smith Elementary School project. First, I'd just like to echo what Steve said. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'd also like to point out it was great having the kind of informal question before this presentation. We have a project website. If you just Google Ivan G. Smith Elementary School Project, it's the first link that comes up. You go down to the bottom, ask us a question. Jen coordinates it. Where's Jen from back in the room smiling there? She gets her questions over to me. Happy to answer any questions you may have as a result of tonight. So I'm here to discuss project costs. Again, I'm the OPM, Owner's Project Manager. What we do is we're really the liaison between the town of Danvers and the MSBA. We have monthly reports, payment requests that we put in on a monthly basis. We manage the schedule, the budget, the contracts, all that fun stuff. We're out there during construction every single day. We're your eyes and ears for the town of Danvers. So, per the MSBA process, as Charlie spoke, we've had 3 major submissions so far. Each one had 2 independent construction cost estimates. So we're up to 6 so far. As Charlie also mentioned, we have a good 10 months or so worth of design to go before we're ready to fully bid out the project. So these construction cost estimates are very preliminary in nature, and they're, I won't say, yeah, I will. They're a little artificially inflated because the cost estimator wants to come in high and not come in low. So it's worth to keep that in mind. So as Charlie also mentioned, yesterday we came in to the MSBA and we received their formal approval on our project scope and budget. So all the numbers up here are formally blessed by the MSBA, which is great. And that was from the schematic design, which was our last submittal of the cost estimate. So I'd like to point out the $7.1 million in escalation and contingencies is kind of what I was speaking to. We have a good while before we bid, bit of an unstable market, so it's a safe number. What we do is we take these construction cost estimates, we put them into what's called an MSBA Form 3011, which is the total project budget template. It's a spreadsheet in Excel, and it lets us know what the MSBA will not pay for. So ineligible costs up there, $15.1 million roughly, and that's how we come up with at the bottom the projected Danvers share using the reimbursement rate. I'd like to point out Danvers started out with a reimbursement rate of 50.58. Every town gets their own individual reimbursement rate based on 3 different socioeconomic factors from the Department of Revenue and Education data. We actually earned almost 5 incentive points on top of that. 2 for energy efficiency, building a green school that will be Mass CHIP certified. 1 for the utilization of CM at risk, as Steve touched on. And then another one for Danvers is great capital maintenance practices to date, 1.875 out of a potential 2 points, which is the highest I've ever seen. Right now, our construction cost estimate is coming in at $509 per square foot. We recently brought on our construction manager at risk who's combing through, and they made it clear that they're confident that they can get us to $500 per square foot. Anyways, we're looking at a total estimated project cost of $52 million for this project.
So everybody gets to rest for the holidays, and then the sprint begins. Thank you, Dr. Dana, Charlie, and Joe for your portions. We'll talk about this for just a minute, and then we'll get to the question portion. But early in 2019, we're scheduling a presentation to the Board of Selectmen where they will be asked to consider formally sending this project to the town meeting, because ultimately town meeting will have to vote on the project in terms of whether they want to move forward with it. So as you can see here, we have meetings scheduled with the Selectmen and the Finance Committee after the holidays. And then we'll hold the session I described a little while ago for town meeting members. We'll individually invite all of our town meeting members to come. Probably have a presentation similar to this. We'll have more updated information by then, but also hoping to have a similarly informal conversation with them about any of the project details that they may be curious about before we take it to town meeting. If the project is approved at town meeting on February 4th, that will really give the design team and the CM the green light they need to go full speed ahead in terms of getting the bid documents ready to go out. I'll make it quick. This has been a pretty aggressive timeline on this project, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One, you heard Joe just mentioned a minute ago that the current cost for our project is about $509 per square foot. That's within $1 or $2, I think, of the average in terms of what it costs right now to build a school within the Commonwealth. Whether it's a $200 million high school or a $30 million elementary school, that price per square foot is sort of within that range. And escalation is happening pretty fast right now, about 4% per year. So one of the goals the committee had a year ago was to try to move quickly through this so that we could not have to wait an additional year to start construction, because then the $52 million project would be $52 million plus an additional 4%. And similarly, we're working with the town is working with its financial advisor to look at debt modeling and debt structures, and there's a real concern that interest rates are going to start to rise again. So from the town's perspective, it has been a pretty aggressive timeline toward the February 4th special town meeting, and the design team's already talked about, if approved, what the construction schedule looks like. So at this point, I would like to ask Charlie and Joe and Lisa and Keith maybe to join me up here. We made the grave error of only having one microphone in the room tonight, and we're filming. DCAT is in the back of the room filming this so that, because we know this is going to be a blockbuster at some point, we're going to want to go online to dcat.org and watch and rewatch this meeting. So what I would ask is if you have a question, raise your hand, shout it out. I may repeat it, not because I can't hear you, but because I want to make sure that DCAT knows what the question was, and then one of us will try to answer the question that you have. So, yes.
The increase in students that's bringing this up, was there a study on the town? Was there a study in the state? Where are these figures coming from? And basically, what is the effect? Do you expect a 5% increase, a 10% increase over the next few years?
The question is, we're talking about a projected increase in the student population in Danvers for the first time in quite a while. The MSBA partners with UMass, so they use the statistics department at UMass, and they look at a host of variables in a community. They do this for towns and cities all over the Commonwealth. They're looking at everything from actual birth rates to sort of the broader census tract demographic shifts, looking at student population, fertility rates within a community. The projection, they did the study for us about 2 years ago now. So we're looking out to 2025. The projection is somewhere around a 17% increase, which increases the Danvers student population from roughly 3,600 to around 4,200 is what they're saying. And when most of us were sitting in the room with them, we found that hard to believe. But they were within a rounding error in 2005 in terms of what actually occurred in 2015. So that's what we're planning for based on that.
Sorry, I asked earlier about the school safety specifically in the new building, and I know it has a separate wing for the students, and then the public enters in one area. Is there anything for the individual classrooms that promote that safety as well, like the door situation, the window situation?
So the question for folks in the back and for the camera, it has to do with the school safety plan. So I had the chance to speak one-on-one before the meeting about kind of the broader school plan, and I think for the benefit of the audience, we should have either Keith or George, whoever would like to take that, to talk a little bit about the broad, and then so that it's at the school level and then at the classroom level, I think is the question.
Thank you, sorry.
So at the classroom level, we've really spent a lot of time thinking about what our existing safety protocols are and how we choose as a district and as a town to approach safety, and making sure that we've looked at everything from connecting doors between classrooms, how many classrooms they connect between, the direction that doors open within the building, so that they help to enhance what our existing safety protocols are. So we have spent a lot of time thinking about it. I don't want to delve too much into it, right, because it's part of our internal workings and safety, but we have spent a lot of time working with Charlie, and there's a separate safety consultant that's on the project that specializes in just this, that we've been working with to make sure we're doing it the best we can.
It was hard to tell from the pictures, but natural light, was that taken into account in designing the classrooms?
So the question is, in terms of building design and windows, was natural lighting taken into account as part of the design process? I could say yes, but I'd rather let Charlie answer.
Yes. Yeah, all of the classrooms have natural lighting. They have significant glass in them, and in fact, Joe talked a little bit about the fact that we're getting incentive points for having a sustainable building, and there's a lot that goes into a sustainable building. One of the things that goes into a sustainable building is meeting criteria around daylighting. So the building will have a lot of daylight. Not every room, there are some internal rooms, but any room that is an active classroom, it will have a wall of glass effectively.
Now, how about those internal rooms? Do they at least have like glass in the door?
They do,
or-
they do.
oh.
And in fact, I think the vision of the district is that those really will be somewhat transparent, because they're used in a multitude of different ways. Those smaller rooms, they can be used for testing, they can be used for small group instruction, they can be used for pull-out spaces, they could be used for small project rooms for kids. So part of the idea there too is not only do we get a little bit of borrowed light, but we have supervision, right? So teachers can see into the room, see what's going on there. So I think that if it gets built, you have the opportunity to tour it, you'll see that it'll feel quite bright and cheerful.
Great, thank you.
Way in the back.
Dr. Dana mentioned a stage. Is the stage the gymnasium or?
It's in both.
The question is about the stage for performing arts, and I'll go, you can see it. I'm going to do something bold here and use the laser, which doesn't work.
Oh, my eye.
Charlie will point to the area. So
That's the stage. So the platform faces the gym and the cafeteria. And you'll be able to close it. Do I have to talk to that?
Sorry.
You'll have to, you can close it off on one side and have it face the other side. So for a small gathering, you could use the platform, and this becomes a cafetorium. And if you have a large gathering, you can use the gym side, and it becomes a gymatorium. Terrible words.
I'm assuming if you're going to increase the student population, you're going to increase the overall population of the town. That would be obviously such things as water, electric, fire, police, and so forth would also have to be increased. Do you have any estimation of what this particular $31 million would have on the tax rate?
So a couple of questions there. One was, is the student population growth we're seeing consistent with overall population growth? And the answer is no. We had a financial summit with the selectmen, the planning board, the school committee, the finance committee, and the library trustees 2 weeks ago. There's an interesting dynamic at play in the Danvers town population. We've seen the senior 65 plus population has increased by close to 20% over the past 10 years. And we're now watching the student population start to grow as well. But the overall population is averaging about 1% per year. So we're getting younger and older at the same time, which I use the dumbbell analogy because it's the working adults in the middle have to lift the dumbbell. So there's pressure on both ends. The question in terms of tax impact on this project, the selectmen had the opportunity to review a couple of different debt models, and I think the most aggressive financing plan would be about $179 per year on average for 20 years, and the least impactful from a budget perspective in the short term would be about $159 per year over 30 years. Those are kind of the two, and that's a lot of caveats there. That's on the average single-family home, and the average tax bill in Danvers as of today is about $6,025. So that when we talk about things like average tax impact, that's what we're looking at. Is you take kind of the median, but that's generally the range that we looked at with the board a couple weeks ago.
You mentioned the flex zones. So for those new zones, will you get to pick which school, or will some kids be forced to switch schools?
So Dr. Dana had mentioned that as part of this, we were able to plug actual birth rate information into a geographic information systems mapping tool. And we worked with the design team to look at not only what the student population is doing, but where we're seeing the growth. And the question is, will these flex zones be sort of mandatory or optional in terms of these zones? And I'll let the superintendent take that.
We will be working with our school committee over the next couple meetings and looking at the policy, so that will be all under discussion. There will need to be some parameters put into place, and it really is meant to have more equitable class sizes. So we really try to work with families that are coming into our district, their first child, and thinking about the kindergarten pieces, and placing them in a school where then they will be able to stay for the entire K-5 experience. But more to come before April.
Thank you, Steve. A question about the neighborhood and that surrounds the school. I think it was back in May at a similar forum out at the school, and there were quite a few neighbors that were upset. They didn't feel like they were included in the process of the design, that they were just learning things that night that they weren't aware of. Have you, since that time, have you done any type of outreach or group, any type of outreach to those neighbors of Renthia Circle and Labeo Drive to kind of make it more transparent for them?
So the question is, some of the neighbors' concerns from early in the process and kind of how are those addressed throughout the process. We did have at least one site visit with the design team and staff to meet with the resident to talk about some specific concerns. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, a lot of the neighbors' concerns align with the same concerns that the school building committee had in terms of traffic, parking, site selection, things like that. So the design hasn't changed significantly from the beginning of this process, in part because the site sort of largely dictates what's possible there. As Joe mentioned, we have about 8 months worth of design ahead of us. So I think as the framework that's been put together and approved by the MSBA starts to have, I guess, meat put on the bones, for lack of a better term, there will be plenty of opportunity to discuss specific aspects, whether that's vegetative screening or the playground and how that, what sort of playground gets selected, more detail in terms of, we've had requests about for pickup and drop off, that we look at the blinking flashing lights that we see, at some of the rail trail crossings and things like that. So I think a lot of that will get fleshed out. But substantively, the design of this project was in part dictated by the site that they were working with.
Just to follow up to that, during the period of the construction, obviously that neighborhood's going to be impacted by the noise and dust and everything. I assume there'll be a certain, you adhere to the hours of operation, 7 to 3 or whatever, and then try to mitigate the dust or any type of impact. Because if you looked at the map of the site, those homes are back pretty much right up onto that drop-off area. So obviously they're going to be impacted by noise and other types of.
So the follow-up question was looking at a plan to minimize impact during construction on the neighborhood. And Matt touched on a couple of the key points, which is that the school administration will be in close contact through our OPM with the construction manager to make sure that all of the testing weeks, that there's a blackout for the school activity. I mean, that's for the students, not the neighbors necessarily, but details like that. Construction, when construction can start and stop, if we're having issues with subcontractors, making sure that they're dealt with in real time, dedicated access for the CM to the site so that there's not a cross-up in that regard. But part of the reason that the town accelerated the selection of the construction manager is that we can now put the sort of the logistics and the site planning that's been done in front of them, because they'll be the ones building the project, and start getting their feedback right up front to make sure that they agree with the phasing and the fencing and protocols and all that. But it will be impactful. There's no question. If you live in that neighborhood, it will be a very big construction project for a period of time. But the commitment from the staff level and I think from Joe and Charlie here is to make sure that to the extent that that can be managed and minimized, that's the goal.
We'll be on site every day. So anytime there's an issue, we have a trailer. The CM at risk also has a trailer. One great thing about the CM at risk project delivery method is that it's really reputation based as opposed to the traditional design bid build, which goes to the lowest bidder, and you kind of force marriage there. We had a pre-qualification process, an interview process. We have a Danvers resident that is on the proposed team and a Wenham resident who owns the company who we chose. And another kind of important thing is the wheel washing and the rodent control is another thing that Steve should have touched on there, just to supplement.
I think the special needs learning centers today are at Thorpe and Riverside. Is there any intention of having a special needs learning center in Smith?
So the question is whether there will be, if there's any consideration to creating special needs learning space at the Smith School as part of this project.
Thank you. We do have, Smith School has a therapeutic learning center. We have, the Highland School has a language-based program. Actually, 4 out of our 5 elementary schools all have a special ed program that has its own classroom and then has inclusion as part of that. So yes, in our new building, we will have special ed programs as part of the Smith school also. With that, we're also looking at having it to be K-5, where presently we need to have some of the programs have been separated, K-2 and 3-5 in different buildings, but because of the new design, we're able to have a K-5, for example, therapeutic program that will be at the Smith Elementary School.
In the budgeting, I'm sure under the non-reimbursable costs, has consideration been given to the infrastructure costs that will creep up as part of it, such as replacement of the entry roads, sidewalks that need to be upgraded, the water main that's probably 50 years old or older in that particular area, storage, and the electrical upgrades, poles, lighting, and so forth. Has that all been figured in the demands on the town during the 18 months of construction, specifically the building departments?
Yeah. So David Lane, our public works director, couldn't be here tonight. He was down in Sturbridge for professional engagement today. But engineering, electric, water, sewer have already been involved in the process. And some of the restoration, some of Some of the restoration at the end of the project will be built into the construction project itself in terms of responsibilities of the construction manager. Other things, one of the things we know we're going to have to do at the end of this project, on one of the site slides, you'll see a lovely new sidewalk that's built into the project that will terminate at the property line, and then the town will have to line up on a budget cycle. We'd like to put some money in the budget to extend that sidewalk out into the neighborhood. So it'll be a combination of project costs that are built into the project and then things that we'll have to budget for outside of the project.
And a continuation or follow-up to that, in the new facility, in the design, considerations are being given, I hope, to the finishes, the products being used so that we can sustain them without an increase in our, maintenance budgets. And a concern I always have is that the most upgraded mechanical systems are put into these buildings for the most efficiencies, but we don't necessarily have the personnel to run them. So we fight with it for years to get comfortable with it.
So I'm gonna rephrase those questions. One is, are we looking at finishes are we looking at the life cycle cost of these finishes? In other words, if we can put in carpet today that's really cheap, but we're gonna have to replace it 4 times before the vinyl tile that's a little more expensive? And the answer to that is yes. And then in terms of building systems and making sure that they make sense, the other division that's been involved in a number of planning meetings is our buildings division. And these are the guys who have to manage the heating system and the cooling system and the building maintenance. So all that's been taken into consideration. One of the things we looked at in this project is a 2-pipe heating and cooling system. Some of our schools currently have a single pipe system, so you have to kind of guess the day on the calendar when you want to switch it over from air to heat. And if you're wrong, you have a bunch of sweating kids for a couple of days, or they're freezing to death. And so we could have value engineered that out of this project and saved probably a couple $100,000 after you consider that we would lose the reimbursement on that as well. But you'd end up with a system you'd be regretting installing 3 years down the road. So all of the public works divisions have played a role in looking at this and will stay pretty heavily involved as we move forward. And I know another good example of that is the accordion glass door. Charlie likes that door a lot. David Lane is not all that enthusiastic about it, but they'll have to work that out as the process moves forward.
Do you anticipate the need for any blasting as part of the site preparation?
The question is, do we anticipate the need for any blasting as part of the site preparation? Probably more sump pumping than blasting, and I'm getting a shake of the head from Charlie. So do you want to talk about some of the geologic work that's been done?
We've done multiple protocols of geotechnical exploration. So there have been 2 major boring investigations out there, a more general one and then a very detailed one once we knew where the proposed building would be going. And there's no finding of any ledge. I mean, it doesn't mean it can't happen, but we've put down a lot of borings. We also did a pretty comprehensive protocol around test pits with the assistance of the Danvers DPW. And what we're finding is a high-edge water table, but the soils are adequate for conventional foundations, and there's no, at the moment, expectation of any blasting or anything. And again, you never know, but there's no, the geotechnical engineers don't expect that based on the subsurface conditions they've seen.
The question is, we've been working this project for over 2 years. The design seems to be very appropriate. However, I have not seen a detailed estimate of what is the other components of the $52 million. And the most significant part is, what are the components that are not being reimbursed by MSBA? Because MSBA reimburses for the educational components. But what are we including in there for the $31 million that we have identified today?
Thank you. The question is, when you look at it, and I brought this slide up because it's an important question. The MSB, it had to do with the effective versus the gross versus the net reimbursement rate from the MSBA. So we show on the slide that the MSBA, the town of Danvers qualifies for a 50.6% reimbursement. As Joe mentioned, we were able to present to them a pretty robust capital maintenance plan for our existing buildings, so we earned some bonus points for that, along with the form of construction management we chose, as well as our plan to make the building green. But when you do the math and you look at a $52 million project and a state participation of 20, that's much less than 55.45. In fact, it's 39.6% because we've run the numbers. One way that you drive up your ineligible costs is by including things in the project that the MSBA won't participate on. And a perfect example of that is when the town did the high school project. They decided to include the administrative wing in that building, even though the MSBA wouldn't reimburse the town. And in that case, the town decided it just made sense to have the school administration in that building, so they accepted that. The only building expense in this project that the MSBA has looked at and said that they won't partner on is about 200 square feet of teacher planning space. So it's an 83,000 square foot school, and there's 200 square feet of planning space that the district, through the education programming process, determined that they needed. So that was an expense that was kept in. What really impacts us on our reimbursement on this project, Charlie had mentioned, maybe Joe had mentioned, that $509 a square foot is kind of the all-in cost for us. And that's, Joe and Charlie have presented us with a host of projects that are being built right now, and that's about the going rate. But the MSBA's current cap per square foot on reimbursement is $333 a square foot. So there's about $167 per square foot delta between what they will cover and what the cost is to build a project. And again, we could downgrade the heating and cooling system to shave the project cost a little bit, but there just isn't. It's a function of what the state will pay for, and I look at that and I say we're still getting they're partnering with us for $21 million. If the state paid 55% of gross costs or even 100% of gross costs, I mean their funding is limited by their portion of the sales tax, so they may be able to do 2 or 3 schools a year if they're covering 100%. But they may be able to do 15 or 20 schools per year if they're covering, in our case, 39%. So the cap pushes down the reimbursement. The other thing that's sizable in that number is the site work, so that the MSBA limits the amount of site work that they will partner on at 8% of the construction cost, which is around $40 million of the 52. I'm looking to Joe to keep nodding. I'll keep talking as long as he's nodding. We have a difficult site in terms of site. There's a lot of site work to be done, so we exceed that 8% cap, but there's no way not to address that. So between the site work that goes above their cap and the per square foot cost, that's how we get from 55% down to an effective rate of 39%. And that's probably something we should put a slide together for, because I'm sure it won't be the last time the question is asked.
And just about the point of having the information online, I mentioned the Smith School project website and how we've had 3 submissions to the state so far. Each one of those included cost estimates, and they're fully included, they're online. I have my computer with me, I could pop it up afterwards and show you how to get to them if you'd like.
That would be great, because I've looked for it and I can't find it.
Happy to help.
Mark stole my thunder. I was actually going to talk about that at the end when the questions were done anyway, but it's like we set that up together. Thank you.
I have another question.
Okay.
We have gone through a rigorous building program for the high school. The high school was budgeted at one time for, I believe, 72, 74.
79.
79, there you go. And I'm wondering if you have in your estimates, that's why I'm asking about the estimates, buried the $10 million that was reversed on the high school, because the estimate was way overblown at the time. It was 79, it went down by $10 million within a year, and then the price came in even lower than that. So that's why I'm asking about the estimate. I've been in business and this is nothing new. Budget estimates are usually high, 10 to 15%. And if that's the case, then great.
So the question had to do with when we're talking about it's a $52 million project as of November 1st, 2018. And the first footnote here is that we wanted to make clear on the slide that there's about $7 million in that $52 million that currently isn't assigned to anything. And as the design process gets more and more complete, some of that money will be moved up into actual project scope components. Some of it will be unnecessary and may linger as part of the project until it's done, and then what we're talking about is a bond authorization. So whatever we don't spend, we don't borrow. So we would hope that we'd see a similar impact. I know part of the $10 million on the high school though was, I believe, the Fields project, which ended up getting funded separately as a $7 million project. So it came out of the initial design and then ended up being treated as a separate project. But regardless, you do tend to see that. I mean, the goal is to come in with a conservative estimate, and then as you get closer and closer to the start of the project, you want to see you'd like to see that $7 million figure at the bottom there shrink. Just want to make sure everybody.
I've been asking questions for 3 months and I haven't got an answer yet, but I'm glad you replied this time.
Oh, you've been asking.
I know I've been asking. The question, as a town meeting member, and I know the process. Has anybody asked the question whether the town can afford this? And I know that they probably have. But the issues are that we have been putting away money for school building programs. And maybe this is not the place for it. This is the time when we speak to the selectmen. That's when the time is going to be appropriate. But the plan was to fund the project as a project that was going to be funded under the debts that we have initiated across the board. And the money was being, every year, we put in $1 million to $1.5 million into the building fund. And now, all of a sudden, we're surprised that it's not enough. So I'm just, wondering what the issues are there.
So the question is about financing the project, and the way that Danvers has funded school projects historically has been to maintain a stabilization fund, which is essentially a savings account. And the town, at the end of a year when revenue exceeds projection and the town doesn't spend all the line items in the budget, generates something called free cash, which is neither cash nor free. But that number gets certified each year by the state, and then in years that we can, we try to fund or replenish that stabilization fund. So leading up to the high school project, we had about $7 million set aside, and the town's practice has been to use that fund to buy down the peak years of debt service to make it manageable within an operating budget. That fund was drawn down to a low of about $3.5 million in fiscal year 2016. And as of July 1st of this year, it's back up to $5.8 million. So it's not where it was for the high school project, but it's been built up so that if the town chose to try to do this project under the levy limit, we'd be able to. And we've been meeting with finance, and there is a path forward to do that. The board at the financial summit started a conversation, which I suspect will continue over the next month or two, which is what do they feel is the most appropriate way to pay for this project. So there's a path forward, and really ultimately it'll boil down to a trade-off between paying more aggressively up front to save interest later versus pushing the interest out later to provide budget relief up front. And that's a question I know the board, they started to discuss it last week, and they'll be focused on it moving forward. But it is a separate question from the need to build the project. We have a path to build this project regardless of the decision that's made, but it's an important decision.
Thank you.
I know that you're probably wrapping up, but I just wanted to say I have 2 children at Smith now, and I think you guys did an amazing job. The design is beautiful, and I'm so excited for my students and my own children. I was wondering if there's any buildings similar in the area that you may have visited that gave you some of the ideas for this building?
So there was a question, but I'll repeat the comment too. She said she's a parent at Smith, and she thinks that what's being proposed and what's being designed is a beautiful school. She's excited for her kids to be in it. And the question was, Is there a similar elementary school that is either recently built or that we could point to as a good example of what we're trying to do here? And I think I'll let Charlie take this one. They were one of the projects that they showed us as part of the recruitment process. I think in Millis was a fairly good example in terms of both, building design and site. But I'd be happy to let Charlie try to answer that.
We did. So it's a combination. So obviously Charlie and Joe bring in expertise because this is what they do for a living all day, every day. So they get to show us examples. MSBA also holds a lot of their informational sessions and process sessions at different schools. So we get to go to the Estabrook School in Lexington that probably opened 4 years ago now. And then on top of that, we had Frank Walker come in as an educational visionary who got to share us examples from across the nation and internationally of all of the work that he does. That's all he does all day, every day also, is really educational visioning and really trying to bring the 21st century skills into buildings. So he showed us probably 50 to 60 examples, and we went through and said, ooh, we really like this, we really like this, and then we put it into this just diagram that had nothing to do with classrooms or anything. It was just look at these zones that we put, and that's how we developed a stage that was on both sides of the gym and the calf, right? We fell in love with that. That ended up in this picture. And then we handed that over to Charlie and his team, and they developed that into what you see here.
Beautiful.
And something that's really great about the MSBA is that they hold us to that educational programming and planning. They comb through, how long was that, roughly,
That meeting?
the whole ed plan itself, was maybe 60, a ton. It's huge, and they read the whole thing. They highlight, hey, you mentioned collaborative computer lab, and where is that on your floor plan? And they pick up on every little thing, and they make sure, or they're not going to pay for the project. So it's great. And Tape has done a good job making that diagram become a floor plan, and we're all excited about it.
Seeing no more hands, I think we'd be happy to stick around for a couple minutes and answer additional questions one-on-one if people prefer that. But I'm delaying here just to make sure. And with that, I will say thank you very much for giving up your Thursday evening to join us. We really appreciate it. And as Joe mentioned, all of the information you saw tonight is on the school website. There's a subpage on the town website, danversma.gov. But if you just Google Smith School Project, you don't even have to put in the IMG. It'll take you to that site. And we have some of the PowerPoint presentations, some of the budget materials, and there's an interactive tool there if you want to sign up for project updates and things like that. So thank you again.